Introduction. On June 14th, 1985, terrorists hijacked TWA Flight 847, which was traveling from Athens to Rome with 139 passengers and 8 crew members. The plane landed in Beirut, Lebanon, where hijackers demanded the return of 700 Palestinians held in an Israeli prison, and then they released several passengers in exchange for fuel, fruit, and sandwiches. Flight 847 departed the next day for Algiers, where more passengers were released, and then returned to Beirut, where one of the hijackers shot U.S. Navy diver Robert Steedham and threw his body onto the tarmac. Lebanese authorities, sympathetic to the hijackers, allowed the murderers to leave the plane under cover of night and replaced them with 12 proxies with closer ties to the government. On day 3, the plane took another lap over the Mediterranean, flying again to Algiers, where it shed even more passengers, and then back to Beirut, where the remaining 39 hostages were hidden in secret locations, and finally released on July 2nd. For 2 months, the plane, a Boeing 727, sat on the apron, tattered and bloody, surrounded by militias shooting at each other across the airport. The media moved on to other events. Hezbollah moved on to other planes. TWA officials bided their time, relying on contacts at Beirut-based Middle East Airlines to monitor hostilities and identify a safe extraction window. On August 13th, they got the call. That's where our story begins. Dirty work. As the 747 levels off at cruising altitude, I settle in for a long night over the Atlantic. My brain is buzzing from the day's dramatic turn of events and all of the variables that'll have to break our way. A newsreel of hijackings and explosions plays on a loop. No way I'm sleeping with all that noise. I work on getting my head into a better place. My father once told me I was the luckiest kid he'd ever seen. You could fall down an open manhole and come up in a new suit of clothes, he said. I have been pretty lucky. I've had my share of close calls, but like a cat, I've always landed on my feet. I imagine myself coming up out of that sewer in a new suit and remind myself that while there's no way to know that everything will go according to plan, things have a way of working out. Growing up, my family didn't have much money. My father was a piano teacher who worked 7 days a week to make ends meet. My mom was a school teacher, so it was pretty clear that if I wanted to attend college, I'd have to earn the money myself. My first job was selling Electrolux vacuum cleaners door to door. I had an old 1934 Ford Roadster with side curtains and no window glass. It was a real head turner in the summer, but that was cold comfort in February when the high temperature often included a minus sign. Mom and Dad paid for my first semester at the University of Maine, but after that I had to work. In addition to selling vacuums, I got a job picking up and delivering dry cleaning. I did a lot of dirty work, building fish runs for the hatcheries in Maine and working on a survey crew. By far the dirtiest, however, was the job Dad helped me get, throwing logs at a pulp mill in Bucksport, Maine, which made paper stock for Newsweek, National Geographic, and other slick magazines. The mill hired college kids at 50 cents an hour. I was assigned a job stabbing logs with a long pike pole called a peavey and hefting them up over my shoulder to a conveyor that would carry them to the barking drum. It was hard, wet, and dangerous work, and the stink from the sulfites used to break the wood down permeated deep into the fibers of my clothes. I can remember getting mad that they made me buy steel-toed safety boots. Those boots cost me $48, a fortune at the time. I whined for about 2 days until my peavey slipped and I jabbed that steel spike into the toe of my boot. If it hadn't been for those steel inserts, I'd never have been able to pass the physical to get into the Air Force. Probably never would have become a pilot. I spent my first 2 college summers at the mill, working 8-hour shifts with one 15-minute break. I've never been in better shape in my life. The next summer, a buddy and I worked for the state, painting the Waldo Hancock Bridge a few miles downriver. In 1950, there was no Occupational Safety and Health Administration. We worked without a net, hanging upside down and backward 135 feet over the Penobscot River. A local lobsterman, usually well into his cups by noon, would sleep away his shift on his boat collecting hazard pay as our state-sponsored supervisor. We must have been out of our minds. A few years later, after I became a pilot, I was flying F-94 Starfires out of Dow Air Force Base in Bangor, patrolling the Northeast with 132nd Air National Guard Wing. I was logging some training hours flying solo near Bucksport when I flew over that same bridge. I'd flown over that bridge many times. I'd flown over a lot of bridges. I'm not sure what made that day any different, but for some reason that day, it occurred to me that I'd never flown under a bridge. And just like that, with all of the forethought you might ascribe to a 23-year-old entrusted with a multi-million-dollar piece of government property, I caught stupid and doubled back. I knew from my summer painting adventure that I had plenty of clearance. I also knew to pull up right away to avoid buzzing Bucksport. I came screaming up that river and under the bridge and hit the afterburner, pulling up into an Immelman loop at almost 600 miles an hour, laughing like an idiot. At the top of the Immelman, I looked down. That was fun. I think I'll do that again. It was that second loop that saved me. When I got back to base, I was called into the commander's office. Someone at Bucksport had phoned in a complaint. The complaint specified that 2 fighter jets had flown under the bridge. There were only 3 of us flying that day out of Bangor, and I was the only one flying over Bucksport. I told the commander I was out practicing aerobatics over the ocean. I'm not sure he believed me, but those were simpler times. He'd been a fighter pilot himself, and given the discrepancy, he could honestly report that the 132nd didn't have 2 jets in the area at that time. I was off the hook. Karma would come back to bite me a few months later when my landing gear failed to lock and I spun out on the runway, totaling the Starfire and almost losing my life in the bargain. The F-94s were introduced in 1953 as an all-weather fighter for the Korean War. They were the first generation of U.S. fighter jets to feature an afterburner, fuel injectors used to create short bursts of speed by dumping extra fuel into the exhaust pipe to create additional thrust without the weight of another engine. By the time they arrived at Bangor, our Starfires were nearing end of life and were prone to mechanical failure. I had another near miss when an engine disintegrated on takeoff, throwing turbine blades into the control cabling. Again, my luck held out though, and I was able to circle around and land. During the Berlin crisis in 1961, the Air Force had me chasing Russians over 3 corridors into Berlin. The Russians would send up their fast fighters, faster than ours, and I'd have to trust my radar guy to judge that separation distance and get us back over the border into France before they could lock on. I never flew in combat, but I fired a lot of missiles in training and in the semi-annual William Tell aerial gunnery competition, the Air Force equivalent of Navy's Top Gun. So I can easily imagine a MiG pilot taking aim at my tailpipe and pulling that trigger. Thinking about missiles and William Tell reminds me of my first competition in 1972. We were flying down in Florida, carrying laser-guided missiles with the warheads removed and firing at F-4 Phantom drones. I'd never fired a live missile before, so I asked a few of the more experienced pilots what to expect. They described a sudden lightness of the plane as the missile launches, and a deafening roar and a blinding vapor trail as it races away. In competition, everything went according to plan. I locked onto my target and fired, bracing myself for the noise and turbulence. The plane got lighter, but I didn't hear any noise. Didn't see any smoke. The rocket telemetry did, however, report a kill, which meant that I'd hit something. My 2-seat that day was a guy named Ronald Apple, whom we nicknamed Rotten Apple for obvious reasons. My call sign was Snake, giving rise to an unintended Garden of Eden theme. We were feeling pretty proud of our first kill, but as soon as we landed, we were separated and grilled for a couple of hours. I'll summarize the gist of the Inquisition as, "Where the hell is your missile?" They really let us have it. I kept lamely showing them my arming pins, removable tags that doubled as inventory control, but we were at a stalemate. I had no missiles on my plane, and they had no record of any missiles being fired. The mystery was solved when a shrimp boat captain called to tell us we owed him a boat. Apparently my missing missile had failed to ignite and dropped into the shrimper's net, tearing off the booms. The damage was recorded as equipment malfunction, so Snake and Rotten Apple lived to fight another day. They wouldn't let us count the kill, though, and they refused to let me put a shrimp boat sticker on my helmet, no matter how hard I begged. Thank you.